I realized that residency training had been this incredible sensory experiential time. And so many things had happened. And I wished I had taken notes. I, in fact, had a good colleague, friend of mine, Anna Reisman, who took notes. And she's writing a book and an editor. And I was envious as she took notes. And I wish that I could have. And part of me thought, well, part of it was just sheer laziness. But I think part of it was being kind of a little too close to the emotional bone at the moment. But once I left was the time I wanted to write them down. And not with any thought of writing a book or publishing, but just wanting to write them down. And the act of writing is so much slower than the act of experiencing. And in medicine, in a busy city hospital, you may have a tragic experience, but there isn't any time to reflect because you've got 10 more admissions and 20 more patients and a team and students and someone's coding. And then the next day you have more patients, and it never stops. There's no time to at all reflect. And so writing was this chance to, for the first time, reflect slowly. Revising was another chance to revisit an experience. And in fact, I wanted to write about Josh. His death really affected me, but I couldn't. And it was many, many years. And it was only after, I don't know how many years it was, but waking up after yet one more nightmare. When Josh died, I was at Carnegie Hall with a third close friend, and we had invited him to come, but he was off on a date with his new girlfriend. And so after he died, I had this recurring nightmare that what if he'd come to us with a concert and had his cardiac arrest at Carnegie Hall? Would I have been able to resuscitate him? If he had been with me, an intern, but without whatever delay it was for EMS, could that few seconds delay have made the difference? And this was a recurring nightmare. And so one night I woke up, and that was when I took the nearest sheet of paper and began writing this story, and then taking time off to write. And after these 18, 20 months, I, of course, was now out of money and I needed to work. But when I came back to Bellevue, then I wanted to keep writing. And I started taking some writing classes and writing with groups. But I really always looked at writing as the chance to go back and revisit the tape and slow it down in the slow motion that we have so little chance for. Well, one of the things I didn't do because of all the schooling was live abroad, and all my friends did, and so I always wanted to live abroad. And I thought, one of these days I will move abroad. Of course, I had a job and family. But about 6 years ago, an opportunity came up. We were in Manhattan, where I live. Real estate is this interesting concept. I'm sure there's no parallel here at all in Rochester. I heard how much a house costs. I realized you could probably maybe get a parking spot for that in Manhattan. But real estate house hunting is this kind of vicarious pleasure that people do in Manhattan. We go to open houses, we look, we fantasize. So I walked into this open house on 23rd Street, not at all looking for a place, and I was smitten by an apartment. Smitten. And I'd been smitten once before, but we didn't act fast enough. And of course, the place was bought in 3 hours. But this time I didn't want to miss out. So of course, you've got to put down a bid within 24 hours, and you're talking your entire life savings plus. But I said, I don't want to miss out. And so we put a bid down on this apartment. Luckily, someone outbid us by, $300,000, some vast enough sum of money that was why I said, go into debt. But I suddenly realized, here we were contemplating spending all of our money on what? 4 walls, and nowhere near as big as this room. That, well, what else could we spend that money on? What about that year abroad? Maybe we should, if we're going to spend money, let's take that year off. And so it was about October, kind of enough time to prepare for the academic medical year. We thought, okay, we're going to do it. We had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at the time. And then I discovered that I was pregnant. And the first thing my mother-in-law said wisely was, you're going to cancel the trip, right? I thought, all this plan, I'd gotten permission from the deans and the medical directors and everyone. I can't cancel now. So it streamlined our thinking. So rather than live in the rainforest or on a cliff or beachside, we would actually live in civilization. My husband's a computer programmer, and he did not want to be delivering a baby in a rainforest. So, and we had a friend who had gone to Costa Rica, and she said, you've got to come to Costa Rica. There's good hospitals, good medical care. And so we decided to go to Costa Rica. And so that July, we arrived in Costa Rica with my 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 4 months pregnant, our 75-pound black lab mutt, and ready for this year in Costa Rica. And I was going to write my novel. I've always wanted to write a novel. Which I did write a lot of the novel. But one of the things that was really interesting about being in Costa Rica was being a patient. I hadn't really thought about that, but suddenly I had to find a doctor, and I had to go to the hospital, and I realized a lot of things about my patients. Almost all of my patients at Bellevue are immigrants, or a vast majority. I would say those for whom English is their native foreign language are probably 15% of my average patients. So most are either speaking a foreign language using an interpreter. And I began to understand some of the challenges they face. For example, and these are little things, making appointments over the phone. I had no idea how hard that was in a foreign language. For me in Spanish, I forever mix up seis and siete. Well, if you mix up numbers on the phone, you get the date wrong, the time wrong, and I just couldn't hack the appointment business. And things like that, or directions, finding things. So it really gave me some insight, and although I wasn't sick, I was just having a baby, I really got some appreciation for what my patients experience negotiating a healthcare system in a foreign language. So I was going to read a little snippet from the book that describes our first encounter with the healthcare system in Costa Rica. I was eager to meet our Tico neighbors, our Costa Rican neighbors, eager to learn about the new society in which we had planted ourselves. I figured that I'd have a few weeks to settle in, explore the healthcare system, check out the local hospital, figure out who would be the right obstetrician for me. But as with many things in life, children do not permit the luxury of leisurely pacing. Costa Rica offers an abundance of tropical fruits, and we were eager and excited to try the many unusual varieties: mamoncino, granadilla, jojote, guayaba, maracuya, cos, cherimoya. On our fourth day in the country, my son Noah discovered that the smooth seed of the guanabana fruit fits perfectly up the nostril of a little boy. My husband was out with our rental car trying to buy a refrigerator. We had no cell phone. I was home alone with my 2 young children. I could touch the bulge of the seed near the bridge of his nose, but I couldn't figure out a way to extract it. I did a mental survey of my situation, debating if it was time to panic. There was a foreign body in my son's nose that could easily be aspirated into his lungs. We were newly arrived in a foreign country. I didn't know my neighbors. I didn't have a cell phone connection to my husband. I didn't have a car. I didn't know the phone number or location of the hospital I'd planned to have my baby in. I didn't know if there was a 911 system in Costa Rica. And while I spoke passable Spanish, I wasn't sure of my ability to explain a guanabana seed up the nose. Yes, I was a doctor, but without medical supplies, nursing staff, medications, resuscitation equipment, being a doctor in an isolated situation wasn't going to be useful if the seed traveled to his lungs. And so I did the only thing I could think of. I phoned home. If there was one phone number that was irrevocably seared into the gyri of any doctor who'd ever trained at Bellevue, it was 3015, the emergency room. And so I picked up my phone in Costa Rica and dialed the Bellevue Hospital ER. "Hi, this is Dr. Ofri," I said casually, as though I'd just been paged from 16 North. "I'm calling from Costa Rica, and we're experiencing a minor tropical emergency. There's a guanabana seed in my son's nose, and I can't get it out." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then a hesitant voice. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?" Those ER clerks were supposed to be unfazable. Meanwhile, I was pressing my brain to recall the child and infant CPR course I'd taken years back. Did you flip the kid over and do thigh blows on their thigh, do back blows? Was it chest thrust from the front? CPR with one hand or two? I was eventually transferred to the pediatric side of the ER. I explained the story again to another clerk and was put on hold yet again. Yes, the story sounded sort of goofy, but what if Noah did aspirate the seed? What if my 2-year-old son suffered a respiratory arrest in a foreign country that I dragged my family to because of some sort of fantasy of learning Spanish? Finally, I was connected to a pediatrics intern who was probably 72 hours out of medical school. It was July. The intern put me on hold one more time while he presented the case to his attending. The way to dislodge a seed from the nose, he instructed me when he returned, was to press the other nostril closed and blow out as hard as you could. But if you couldn't explain that to a toddler, you had to blow it out for them, essentially performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. So I lay Noah on the floor with Nava, my 4-year-old daughter, and Juliet, the dog, crowding in to see what was happening. I occluded Noah's unaffected nostril, placed my lips over his, and blew as hard as I could. Needless to say, both Nava and Noah found this hilarious. giggling uncontrollably, making it difficult for me to maintain the tight seal I recalled from my CPR training. Juliet began howling, licking and nosing her way into the action while I tried to remain composed. The guanabana seed turned out to be a tenacious little thing, not amenable to coaxing massage or mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Luckily, Noah's respiratory status remained stable. Benji returned home, sans refrigerator, and we obtained directions to the local hospital after knocking on a neighbor's door. This last part, directions, may sound like a small thing, but in Costa Rica it was anything but. For all its advances in so many aspects of society, Costa Rica was surprisingly quaint when it came to roadways. The annual rainy season flooded the roads for weeks on end, and it served to pucker and pockmark the roads with potholes larger than many Manhattan apartments. The streets were windy and perilously narrow, filled to bursting with two-way traffic of buses, trucks, bicycle riders, and cows. But the abysmal quality of the roads was only the beginning of the driving challenge in Costa Rica. There were no street signs to be found. Not a single road was labeled. But of course, there weren't any street names either, so the lack of signage was superfluous. No one could offer me an explanation for this. It was simply the way it was. As a result, direction giving was a complex art form that typically involved such open-ended expository suggestions as driving 500 meters to the mango tree, turning right where the post office used to be, circling around the pothole near the house with the blue fence, and so on. It wasn't just that those of us from non-tropical climes might not be able to distinguish a mango tree from a guayaba tree from a jojote tree, or might not know where the former post office had existed, or that the blue fence had been painted green in 1973, or might not be aware that 500 meters was a Rorschach-like estimation of distance that bore only a fleeting resemblance to that of the European Union metric standards. No, it was that fully half of the proffered directions were simply incorrect. Everybody was eager to provide directions. Whether people actually knew where the destination was had no bearing on their willingness to offer intricate and idiomatic expressions. In our entire year, I never met a single person who said, "I don't know." And so, armed with a dissertation's worth of directions, we piled the family into the rental car and ventured forth, me with one hand on Noah's wrist to monitor his pulse. We bumbled our way past the landmarks of the fruteria and what we hoped was a mango tree onto the directionless highway. The exit for the major hospital, like the one leading to the international airport, was pristinely unblemished by signs. Luckily, the roadside flower stand, the landmark for our exit, was open and doing a brisk business on that warm July day. The registration in the hospital was endless as I painstakingly filled out forms in Spanish.